I found it in a cathedral in Prague that tourists walk past every day without seeing what they're looking at. A stone column appearing to drape over itself like fabric frozen mid-fold, not carved to look like cloth, actually behaving like cloth in stone. The folds have the natural randomness of fabric responding to gravity and its own weight. The way the material gathers in bunches shows physics of flexible material, not artistic representation of flexibility. And when you examine the surface closely, you see something impossible. The grain of the stone runs continuously through the folds, runs in directions that couldn't exist if this was carved from solid block. The grain follows the curves, as if the stone was actually soft when it took this shape, as if someone folded stone-like fabric, then let it harden, preserving the folds permanently. Except that's impossible according to everything we understand about stone and the tools available to medieval craftsmen who supposedly created this. This is an isolated example. Once you recognize what you're seeing, once you understand that certain architectural elements weren't carved but were shaped while soft, you start finding them everywhere. Columns that twist in ways impossible to carve with available tools. Stone drapery with folds too complex and too natural to be chiseled. Decorative elements showing compression marks where soft stone was pressed into molds. Joints between stones showing no gaps, as if the materials were soft enough to press together seamlessly, then hardened in perfect contact. And perhaps, most tellingly, unfinished works showing transition states. Stone that's partially soft and partially hard. Elements that started being shaped then were abandoned mid-process, still showing characteristics of both states. These aren't artistic interpretations. These aren't even supremely skilled carvings. These are frozen evidence of technology that could temporarily soften stone, making it workable like clay, then allow it to reharden, maintaining the shaped form with all the structural properties of the original stone. The official explanation is that medieval stonemasons were simply incredibly skilled, that they could carve stone to look like fabric through patient work with hammer and chisel. That what appears to be impossible complexity was achieved through craftsmanship we can admire, even if we can't replicate it. But that explanation collapses when you examine the work closely. When you analyze the grain patterns, when you consider the tool marks that should exist, but don't. When you recognize that some of these pieces show characteristics that cannot be produced through carving regardless of skill level. When you understand that we're not just looking at human achievement beyond our current capabilities, but at technology we've completely lost, technology that Tartarian civilization apparently possessed and used routinely in construction, technology that was systematically suppressed after their civilization was eliminated because acknowledging it would require acknowledging that our ancestors had capabilities we don't, would require admitting that technological development isn't linear progress, but includes catastrophic loss. The stone softening hypothesis sounds impossible until you examine the evidence without preconceptions. Multiple architectural elements across Europe and Asia, showing stone worked in ways that cannot be explained by conventional carving. Stone columns with spiral patterns, where the grain follows the spiral rather than running straight, as it would in carved work. Stone drapery, where the folds show the kind of natural randomness that only occurs when actual flexible material responds to gravity. Decorative elements, showing such fine detail and such deep undercutting that getting tools into the spaces would be impossible. And most compellingly, unfinished pieces, where you can see the transition. Can see stone that's harder in some areas and softer in others. Can see where someone was shaping material that had different working properties than the final hardened state. This is evidence not of carving skill, but of material property manipulation, of technology that could temporarily alter stones, molecular structure making it pliable enough to shape by hand or with simple tools, then allowing it to return to its original hardness, preserving the shaped form. The global distribution proves this was an isolated technique or regional peculiarity. Stone drapery appears in cathedrals across Europe, appears in temples in India and Southeast Asia, appears in structures attributed to cultures separated by thousands of miles who supposedly had no contact, always showing the same characteristics, always displaying the same impossibilities, always suggesting the same technology. The standard explanation invokes convergent development, claims that skilled craftsmen in different cultures independently achieve similar effects through similar techniques. But when the technique being claimed is impossible with available tools, Convergent development becomes more likely explanation is that these structures were all built during or influenced by a period when stone softening technology was available, when Tartarian technological knowledge was accessible to builders across regions that maps labeled, and that the technology was lost when that civilization was eliminated, leaving only the frozen evidence of its existence in architectural elements we can observe but cannot replicate. If you're already questioning whether stone could really be temporarily softened, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling me if you've ever seen stone architectural work that seemed too complex to have been carved. Because what I'm about to show you is the physical evidence proving that conventional carving cannot explain these examples and the theoretical frameworks suggesting how stone softening might have been achieved. The impossibilities accumulate when you examine specific examples systematically. Take the stone chain at Santa Maria della Vittoria in Rome. Carved supposedly from single block of marble, it shows individual chain links fully separated, moving freely, able to swing and rotate. The standard explanation says this was carved by carefully removing material around each link, using small chisels and incredible patience. But examine the piece closely. The links are circular in cross-section, not flat or squared, but perfectly round. To carve that from solid block, you'd need to reach tools around the back of each link to shape the hidden side. The geometry makes that impossible. You cannot get chisels into the necessary positions to carve the back side of a fully enclosed circular link. The piece cannot be made by carving from solid stone, but it makes perfect sense if the stone was soft. If you could shape links individually, then thread them together while soft, then allow the whole structure to harden, the final result matches exactly what we see. A chain of fully mobile links carved from one piece becomes impossible, but fabricated from soft stone becomes obvious. The column twists provide even clearer evidence. Multiple columns across European architecture show spiral patterns where the entire column appears to twist like rope. The grain of the stone follows the twist. Not just the surface decoration, but the actual internal structure. In a carved piece, the grain would run straight vertically, because columns are carved from vertical stone blocks. The grain always reflects the orientation of the original block. But in twisted columns, the grain spirals, follows the twist, as if the stone was actually rotated while plastic, then hardened in the twisted position. You cannot carve that. Cannot make the internal grain structure follow a pattern that contradicts the orientation of the original block, but you can absolutely create it by twisting soft stone, then letting it harden. The evidence is literally internal to the piece, shows what happened in ways that surface carving cannot fake. The stone drapery shows the most impossible characteristics. In architectural works across Europe, stone appears draped like fabric with folds, and gathers that respond to gravity exactly as cloth would. Not approximate representations, but actual physical behavior. The mathematics of how fabric folds under its own weight follows specific patterns. The way gathers form, the way folds cascade, the way material bunches and drapes. These patterns are determined by flexibility and gravity and cannot be replicated in rigid material through carving. Yet stone drapery shows exactly these patterns, shows folds that accumulated where material was compressed, shows draping that follows the physics of flexible material responding to gravitational force. The only way to create such accurate representation would be to actually drape flexible material and reproduce every fold exactly. But that's not what happened. The evidence shows these were created by actually draping stone while it was flexible, by letting gravity shape soft stone into natural folds that then hardened, preserving the exact configuration created by physical forces rather than artistic interpretation. The toolmark analysis is damning for the conventional explanation. Carved stone shoes tool marks shows the traces of chisels and hammers used to shape it. Even in finely finished work, microscopic analysis reveals the scars of the carving process. But many examples of supposedly carved stone showing impossible complexity show no tool marks at all, show surfaces that were never struck with carving implements, show finishes that could not be achieved through abrasive polishing of carved surfaces. The stone appears to have been shaped without tools, appears to have been formed rather than carved. That's impossible if the stone was solid during shaping. but makes perfect sense. If the stone was soft enough to form by hand or with simple smoothing tools, the absence of tool marks isn't evidence of perfect craftsmanship. It's evidence that the stone was shaped without the tools conventional carving requires. The acoustic softening hypothesis provides theoretical framework for how this might have been achieved. Modern materials, science understands that matter responds to vibration. Specific acoustic frequencies can affect molecular bonds, can temporarily increase mobility of molecules in solid materials. Research into acoustic manipulation shows that ultrasonic frequencies can cause localized softening in various materials. The effects are subtle with current technology, but the principle is established. If Tartarian civilization possessed more sophisticated acoustic technology, if they could generate precise frequency combinations at sufficient amplitude, they might have been able to induce temporary softening of stone. Could have exposed stone to specific acoustic fields that disrupted the crystalline bonds enough to make the material plastic. Could have shaped it while maintaining the acoustic field, then allowed it to reharden when the field was removed. This explains the evidence perfectly, explains why there are no tool marks, explains why the grain structure follows the final shape, explains how impossible geometric configurations were achieved. The stone was actually soft during shaping through acoustic frequency manipulation. The chemical softening alternative is equally plausible. Various substances can affect stone's surface hardness. Certain organic acids can temporarily soften limestone and marble. Modern conservation work uses weak acid solutions to clean stone by temporarily softening surface layers for removal. But Tartarian technology might have achieved deeper penetration, might have used compounds that temporarily affected stone throughout its volume rather than just surface layers. Alchemical texts mention preparations that supposedly made stone workable, usually dismissed as fantasy, but what if they were documenting real chemical formulations? What if those preparations actually worked, but the knowledge was lost or suppressed? Stone treated with appropriate chemicals could become plastic, could be shaped, could then be treated with another compound to reverse the process and restore hardness. This is sophisticated materials chemistry, but not impossible, and it explains the evidence as well as acoustic softening does. The electromagnetic hypothesis is most speculative, but worthy of consideration given what we've documented about Tartarian electromagnetic technology. Specific electromagnetic field configurations affect molecular structure, can influence crystalline bonds, can potentially create conditions where solid materials become temporarily plastic. Modern research into electromagnetic forming of metals shows the principle works. Strong electromagnetic pulses can make metal more formable, can reduce the force required for shaping, can enable configurations impossible with conventional forming. If similar principles apply to stone, if the right field characteristics could disrupt the crystalline structure enough to induce plasticity, then Tartarian electromagnetic technology could have enabled stone softening. The acoustic and electromagnetic approaches might even be complementary, working together to achieve effects neither could produce alone. The geometry of Tartarian buildings might have generated the necessary field combinations. Naturally, through architectural resonance and electromagnetic properties we've documented in other contexts. Subscribe now and drop a comment about whether you think acoustic or chemical stone softening sounds more plausible, because what comes next shows the evidence that the technology was deliberately suppressed and why modern science refuses to seriously investigate these possibilities. Despite the overwhelming architectural evidence, the suppression of stone softening research is documented in patent office records and academic publication patterns. Between 1850 and 1920, multiple inventors filed patents for methods of softening stone through various means: chemical treatments, acoustic resonance, electromagnetic exposure. Some patents were granted, then immediately classified. Others were rejected despite including working demonstrations. The inventors faced systematic obstacles: loss of funding, professional marginalization, in several cases, mysterious deaths shortly after filing patents for stone softening methods, and the patents themselves, even the granted ones, disappeared from accessible records, were reclassified or lost. The pattern matches suppression we've documented in other domains. Someone didn't want stone softening technology to be recovered or rediscovered, wanted to ensure it remained firmly in the realm of impossible legend rather than becoming practical technique. The academic suppression is more subtle, but equally effective. Archaeological and architectural researchers who suggest stone was shaped while soft rather than carved face career consequences. Papers proposing stone softening are rejected from mainstream journals, regardless of evidence quality. Researchers pursuing the topic lose funding and institutional support. Graduate students are discouraged from investigating the question. The entire academic establishment treats stone softening as pseudoscience, despite the physical evidence demanding explanation. When examples of impossibly complex stonework are discussed, the explanation is always supreme craftsmanship, never material manipulation. Even when the craftsmanship explanation requires believing medieval workers achieved precision and complexity we cannot replicate with modern tools. Even when the evidence clearly shows characteristics impossible to produce through carving. The academic consensus refuses to seriously consider alternatives to conventional carving because doing so would require acknowledging lost technology, would require admitting our ancestors possessed capabilities we've lost, would threaten the narrative of linear technological progress. The practical implications explain the suppression. If stone could be temporarily softened, construction becomes radically different. Foundations could be cast in place rather than assembled from cut blocks. Complex curved structures become simple to fabricate. The precision required for stone masonry disappears because soft stone presses together seamlessly. Construction time decreases dramatically. Skill requirements decline because shaping soft stone is far easier than carving hard stone. And most importantly, the entire economic structure of modern construction would face disruption. Concrete industry, steel industry, all the materials and methods that replaced stone construction, all threatened by revival of stone technology that's superior in durability while competitive in cost and construction time. The industries that profit from current construction methods have every reason to prevent recovery of stone softening technology, have every reason to ensure it remains dismissed as impossible, despite the evidence. The replication attempts that have occurred prove that technology is achievable, but face immediate suppression. A Russian materials scientist in the 1960s published preliminary results showing that specific ultrasonic frequency combinations caused measurable softening in limestone samples. The research was discontinued before completion. A Peruvian team in the 1980s investigated local legends about plant extracts that supposedly soft stone, found compounds that did produce surface softening effects, then lost funding before identifying the active ingredients or achieving deeper penetration. An American inventor in the 1990s filed a patent for electromagnetic stone softening device, had the patent granted, then had it immediately classified under national security provisions that remain sealed today. Every attempt to recover the technology faces obstacles that prevent completion and publication, faces suppression that ensures stone softening remains impossible legend rather than demonstrated technique. The few modern craftsmen attempting to replicate historical stone drapery using only carving prove it cannot be done. Master stonemasons with decades of experience and modern precision tools cannot produce the natural folds and complex undercutting visible in historical examples. They can create impressive approximations, can carve stone that looks draped from certain angles, but close examination always reveals the limitations, reveals where tools couldn't reach, reveals where the artist had to approximate rather than truly replicate the physics of draped fabric, reveals that even with modern diamond tools and pneumatic hammers, even with CAD modeling and mechanical guidance, we cannot match what supposedly primitive craftsmen achieved with hammer and chisel. That's not evidence of lost craftsmanship. That's evidence of lost technology. Evidence that the original works weren't carved at all, but were shaped while the stone was soft through methods we no longer possess. The unfinished examples are smoking guns. In several locations across Europe and South America, stone elements show partial completion, show sections that are fully formed, and sections that are rough. And in the transition zones, you can see something extraordinary. The stone appears to have different properties in different areas. The finished sections show the impossible characteristics we've documented. The unfinished sections show more conventional stone properties, as if work was interrupted mid-process, as if someone was softening and shaping stone but didn't complete the piece before whatever event caused abandonment. These transitional pieces show that softening wasn't uniform or permanent, show that the technology required active application, show that finished areas had returned to normal hardness, while areas still being worked remained altered. This is direct evidence of temporary softening process, evidence of technology being applied, being interrupted, leaving frozen record of its application in partially completed state. The geographic distribution of the most impossible examples correlates precisely with Tartarian territorial extent. The stone chains, the twisted columns, the most complex stone drapery, all appear in regions that maps labeled Tartaria or show clear Tartarian. Architectural influence. This isn't universal distribution. This is concentrated in specific territories during specific time frame. The technology appears to have been regionally available, was concentrated in Tartarian civilization, and disappeared when that civilization was eliminated. The examples that remain are remnants, are frozen evidence of technological capability that was once routine in those regions, but which vanished so completely that we now debate whether it could ever have existed. The geographic clustering proves this wasn't universal human capability, developed independently across cultures. This was specific technology possessed by specific civilization, whose elimination removed the technology from human toolkit. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe if you're recognizing that stone softening evidence is hidden in plain sight, precisely because acknowledging it requires acknowledging lost technological sophistication that threatens our understanding of history and our assumptions about progress. The psychological barriers to accepting stone softening are as important as the physical evidence proving it. Modern education teaches that technology progresses linearly, that we're more advanced than our ancestors, that ancient and medieval people were primitive compared to us. Stone softening contradicts that narrative completely, proves our ancestors possessed capabilities we've lost, proves that technological development includes catastrophic losses, not just steady advancement. Accepting stone softening means accepting that we're not at the pinnacle, means accepting that we're actually less capable in certain domains than previous civilizations. That's psychologically threatening to modern populations taught to believe in perpetual progress. Easier to dismiss the evidence than accept implications that challenge foundational assumptions about human development. The architectural establishment has particular reasons to resist stone softening. Modern architecture abandoned stone construction in favor of steel, concrete, glass. That abandonment was justified by claiming stone was too difficult to work with, too expensive, too limited in what shapes it could achieve. But if stone could be softened, if historical builders could create any form they wanted by shaping plastic stone, then all those justifications collapse. Then the abandonment of stone looks like loss rather than progress, looks like choosing inferior materials because we lost the knowledge to work with superior ones. Modern architects would have to confront that their entire field was built on premise that stone construction was primitive and limited, when actually it was sophisticated and versatile. Would have to acknowledge that Gothic cathedrals and classical temples represent technological achievement their modern training cannot match. That's professional existential crisis. Easier to maintain that stone was always carved, that historical achievements were just superior craftsmanship, than to admit the entire modern architectural paradigm was built on misunderstanding what was possible. The construction industry faces even more direct threat. Concrete is essential material in modern building. Trillions in annual economic activity, vast infrastructure for production and application, entire engineering disciplines built around its use. But concrete degrades, requires constant maintenance and eventual replacement. Stone doesn't. Stone structures from Tartarian era still stand after centuries, showing minimal deterioration. If stone softening was recovered, if construction could shift back to stone using technology, making it as easy to work as concrete while providing superior longevity, the concrete industry faces The economic interests are massive. The pressure to prevent stone softening recovery is enormous. Every advancement toward recovery threatens established industries with combined revenue in trillions annually. They have resources and motivation to ensure the technology remains firmly dismissed as impossible. The evidence that people see stone softening proof daily but don't recognize it comes from asking tourists and architecture students what they notice. Show them stone drapery. Ask how it was made. Almost universally they say, carved by skilled craftsmen. Point out the grain following the folds. Point out the impossibly deep undercut. Point out the perfect physics of draped fabric. Most still maintain it must be carved because that's the only explanation they've been taught. The evidence is right in front of them, is undeniable, once pointed out. But the framework for understanding it as evidence of different technology simply doesn't exist in their education. They've been taught stone is carved. Period. So they see impossible carving rather than recognizing impossible carving as evidence of not carving. The suppression works through education that provides only one acceptable explanation, through training that teaches people to dismiss their own observations if those observations don't fit a proved framework. The few architects and engineers who do recognize the impossibilities and speak about them face professional consequences. Papers rejected. Conference presentations canceled. Funding withdrawn. Professional associations distance themselves. The career price for publicly questioning whether historical stone was carved is high enough that most stay silent even after recognizing the evidence. Even after understanding that conventional explanation doesn't work, they know what they're seeing. No, it contradicts official narrative, but saying so means professional suicide. So the knowledge remains trapped in minds of individuals who recognize the truth but cannot speak it, cannot publish it, cannot teach it. The suppression doesn't require active censorship, just passive professional consequences for anyone who challenges approved explanations. The threat of career damage is sufficient to maintain silence across entire fields of expertise. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what I need you to understand is that stone softening isn't ancient mystery or lost magic. It's suppressed technology that worked, that left extensive evidence, and that remains unrecoverable because acknowledging it threatens to many modern interests and assumptions. The recovery pathway exists, but requires challenging multiple institutional barriers simultaneously. Requires materials scientists willing to seriously investigate acoustic and chemical stone softening despite career risks. Requires architects willing to publicly state that historical achievements cannot be explained by conventional carving. Requires historians willing to acknowledge that technological capability existed in past that exceeds certain modern capacities. Requires funding that doesn't depend on industries threatened by stone softening recovery. Requires educational reform that teaches students to examine evidence without prejudice rather than accept approved explanations, regardless of contradictions. None of these requirements are individually impossible, but coordinated simultaneously, they become nearly insurmountable. The institutional barriers are layered specifically to prevent recovery, even when individuals within various fields recognize the evidence. The political implications extend beyond just construction technology. Stone softening is one domain of Tartarian technological superiority. Acoustic healing is another. Free energy collection, another. Longevity enhancement, another. Each domain shows lost capabilities. Each domain shows systematic suppression. Each domain threatens modern industries and challenges progress narratives. But together, they prove something larger, prove that entire technological paradigm was lost. That Tartarian civilization operated on fundamentally different principles than our industrial society. That we're not recovering pieces of lost knowledge, but are missing comprehensive technological framework that integrated multiple domains we treat as separate. Stone softening wasn't isolated technique, was part of broader understanding of how acoustic and electromagnetic fields could manipulate matter. The acoustic principles that softened stone also healed humans and generated energy. The technology was unified, and recovering any piece threatens to reveal the whole. That's why suppression is so comprehensive. Why stone softening remains dismissed, despite architectural evidence that's literally unmissable once you look for it. We walk past proof daily. Stone columns that twist impossibly. Stone drapery that shows perfect physics of fabric. Stone chains carved from single blocks and geometries that make carving mechanically impossible. All of it visible, all of it documented. All of it photographed and published, and all of it explained away as supreme craftsmanship, because acknowledging the alternative requires acknowledging lost technological sophistication that modern institutions cannot accept without confronting their foundational narratives about human development and progress. The stone remembers, even when we've been taught to forget, shows what it once was, shows how it was shaped, shows capabilities we've lost, and the evidence is still there. Still visible, still undeniable, waiting for generation willing to look at stone drapery and ask not how skilled the carvers were, but what technology allowed stone to drape like fabric in the first place. The question changes everything, opens door to recognizing that what we see isn't art representing impossible, is engineering achieving impossible through methods we've lost and been prevented from recovering. The stone was soft. The evidence proves it. And nobody questions it, because questioning it means questioning everything we've been taught about history, technology, and human capability. The price of that questioning is high enough that most choose not to see what's literally carved in stone all around us.